Ever get that feeling? Like you're really curious about something, something important about how the world works. Maybe you even see it happening around you with the little ones.
Yeah.
But then start digging into the research, and it can feel like a whole other puzzle just figuring that out.
Oh, totally.
So that's exactly what we're tackling here today on the deep dive. We're diving deep right into the heart of early childhood, those social interactions, how kids figure each other out. And we're getting specific, looking at the whole bully and victim dynamic, but in preschool. So think those little ones up to age 6.
And we've got some really good stuff to work with here. This deep dive is going to be based on a pretty comprehensive review of all the research on this topic. Kind of snapshot back in 2011, published in the Educational Psychology Review.
Perfect.
It's a really great foundation to build from.
Couldn't agree more. So our mission here is pretty simple, right?
Yep.
Take all those key insights. Like, what does bullying even look like when these kids are tiny? How does it all start? What makes it worse? What makes it better? And most importantly, what can we actually do about it? We're going for those light bulb moments, you know?
Right.
The surprising facts that really stick with you. But all that without getting bogged down with too many details.
I like it.
So to kick things off, let's unpack the idea of just defining bullying, especially in these early years, because it might seem simple at first, but trust me, there are some pretty surprising twists and turns here.
And I think what's really fascinating right off the bat is that even how we define bullying, it kind of has to change when you're thinking about preschoolers. I mean, these kids are still figuring out their social skills, right?
Right.
Their thinking, how they use language is not as mature as older kids. So all those ways we usually define bullying for, say, elementary school kids really needs a closer look for this younger group.
Absolutely. And one of the big names in this field, Dan Olias, he gives us a good starting point with his definition. It basically breaks down into 3 main parts. You've got intentional harm doing, has to be happening repeatedly over time, and there's got to be a power imbalance in the relationship.
Okay.
It's often unprovoked, and you see it in all kinds of ways, right?
Yeah.
Physical stuff, the words kids use, even just excluding someone from playing. But here's a big surprise. Even with these tiny humans, their peers are actually around for a lot of these bullying incidents, often encouraging it.
Yeah, that's huge. Really changes how you think about the whole problem, doesn't it?
It does. It's not just a one-on-one
Well,
thing.
no, not at all. And even thinking about it as repeated harm, like an adult might. A young child who's still learning the social roads might not see it that way.
Right.
And what about all those little disagreements over, a toy or who gets to stand where on the playground? Is that really a power imbalance, or are they just trying to figure out how to get along?
Exactly. And that's where the research gets super important because it's clear. Playful teasing, even just a typical fight where both kids are equally into it, that's not bullying.
Right.
With bullying, you have that element of one kid, maybe a whole group, kind of having more social weight than the other one.
Yeah, definitely.
You mentioned before the instability of victim roles. What's interesting about that?
Well, if you compare preschool to later years, a kid might get picked on for a bit in preschool, but they're less likely to be the victim over and over again for a long time. I mean, their social circles are still like swirling around, forming and changing all the time.
Makes sense in that kind of environment.
It does.
And because of that, how fluid things are and that their social skills are still developing, some people even say that unjustified aggression is a better description. It puts the focus on the act itself not having a good reason, whether it's physical, words, or even messing with someone's head.
Right. It's really about saying, hey, this just wasn't okay.
Exactly. And it makes
Yeah.
you wonder, how do preschoolers even wrap their heads around bullying as we define it?
That's the thing. Research actually shows they don't separate different types of aggression the way older kids do. A younger child might just see something as, was this mean or not mean? They don't necessarily think about if it happens a lot or if one kid has more power or even what the other kid was trying to do.
This is where it gets really cool because when you think about Piaget's work, this totally fits with his idea of the preoperational stage.
Right.
Kids are focused on what happened, the outcome, not so much on what someone meant to do. So if someone gets hurt, that's bad, even if it was an accident or if it's never happened before.
Totally. So when we're trying to understand what's happening with these little ones, we need ways to assess it that work for them, right?
Right.
Forget those typical questionnaires where older kids tell you about themselves and their classmates. Preschoolers just can't do that reliably.
Yeah.
You ask them straight up, they might not even have the words to explain what's going on.
And teacher reports, you'd think those would be more helpful, but they've got their own problems.
Yeah, for sure.
Teachers might struggle to tell the difference between one-off conflicts and actual bullying that's happening over and over again. Plus, they might be a bit hesitant to put that bully label on a little kid.
And that's where you see some really interesting, innovative methods coming in, like using photographs.
Oh, that's cool.
Right, for peer nominations. You show them pictures of their classmates and ask who pushes others or who gets pushed, and they can often point out the kids who were involved.
Pictures, that's brilliant. Simple, visual, something they get right away.
It works.
And then there's just watching what happens, plain and simple. Observing, maybe even using video recordings that can catch those obvious aggressive behaviors that might slip through the cracks with other methods.
That's what Pepler and Craig's research really showed. They found bullying happening super often on playgrounds, like every 7 minutes.
Every 7 minutes, wow.
It's more common than you'd think.
That really puts it into perspective. So to get the best understanding of what's happening, it sounds like a combination of things is key.
Definitely.
Gathering info from teachers, parents, and even the kids themselves in a way that works for their age, and then combining that with watching them interact. That's what they call the multi-informant, multi-method approach, and it gives us the clearest picture.
Absolutely. And, even with all of the challenges of defining and measuring bullying in these early years, the research we do have, it shows us preschoolers are doing both kinds of bullying.
Okay.
The direct stuff, like hitting and name-calling, and then the indirect bullying. That's more about social exclusion, maybe spreading rumors.
So it's not just the obvious physical stuff. Even at that age, they're figuring out the social game.
Exactly.
And how common is all this? What do the numbers actually say?
Well, those numbers jump around a bit depending on how each study defines bullying and how they may measure it.
Makes sense.
But some research suggests something like 25% of preschoolers are involved as aggressors, 22% as victims, and a smaller chunk, around 2%, are bully victims. So those are the kids who are both bullying and being bullied themselves.
Okay, so a decent percentage.
Yeah.
And how does that compare to, say, elementary school kids?
It's actually higher in preschool. The rates for older kids tend to be lower, like maybe 10% for victims, 7 to 15% for bullies, and 6 to 10% who are both.
Huh. Seems like it might be more common in those really early years.
Yeah, and there are a few reasons for that. The time frame researchers look at how often something has to happen to be counted as bullying, whether they include those less obvious forms like social exclusion that all plays a role.
Right.
But it also just reflects how much kids are changing, developing in those preschool years.
So within those preschool years, as they get a bit older, does the experience of being a victim change, say, between ages 3 and 6?
It does. As they age, their social worlds get more complex,
Yeah.
They start forming those two-way friendships, becoming part of bigger peer networks. Younger preschoolers, their connections might be less stable. So that could affect how much being victimized is tied to how good their relationships are.
Makes sense.
But by the time they're 5 or 6, their social understanding is sharper, they're better at managing their emotions, and that can lead to more targeted aggression, sometimes even based on a kid's reputation within the group.
Oh, interesting. So it becomes less random, more strategic.
In a way, yeah. And we also see a shift in how they're aggressive. Physical aggression,
Yeah.
it peaks around 30 months old, then starts to decline. But at the same time, that indirect or relational aggression, stuff like excluding someone, that actually increases with age. It's almost like a more advanced way to wield social power as their language gets better.
So give me an example of that. How does the aggression change?
Imagine a younger preschooler. Their relational aggression might be like, if you don't share your block, I won't be your friend. Very direct, tied to that moment.
Right.
But an older preschooler might be sneakier, whispering to another kid not to play with someone because of something that happened earlier. Their memory for social stuff is better, and they understand how exclusion works on a deeper level.
That really makes the difference clear. Now we know kids aren't developing in a bubble. What about their families, even their genes? How do those things fit into this?
That's a big piece of the puzzle, and research points to a bunch of family-related risks. Things like inconsistent parenting, or if discipline is really harsh, if there are a lot of negative emotions flying around at home, conflicts, even violence. All those have been linked to kids becoming both aggressive and being more likely to be victims.
So a child who's experiencing aggression at home, they're more likely to act out and also be a target when they're at preschool?
That's the general idea. This might surprise you, but overprotective or intrusive parenting, that's also been linked to boys becoming passive victims. The thing is, maybe they don't learn how to handle conflicts on their own if someone's always stepping in.
Huh. You'd think being protected would be a good thing.
You would, but it highlights how complicated this all is. Some studies that took other factors into account, like the family's overall tendency for certain behavior patterns and the child's individual personality, those studies found things like parental rejection, overprotection, lack of warmth. Those weren't directly linked to bullying or victimization when you consider everything else going on. It's not as simple as cause and effect.
What about socioeconomic background? Does that matter?
It does. Lower socioeconomic background has been identified as a risk factor for being involved in bullying, both as the bully and the victim.
Okay, so family environment is definitely a big deal. But you also mentioned genes, right?
Right. When you look at how much of aggression is heritable, the research suggests genes account for a good chunk, maybe 50%, of the differences in physical aggression between kids. The rest seems to be shaped by their unique individual experiences. So it's by half nature, half nurture for that type of aggression.
So both our biology and our upbringing matter.
Exactly. But it gets even more interesting when you separate physical aggression from social aggression.
Okay.
Physical aggression has those strong influences from genes and those individual experiences. But social aggression, the genes seem to matter less. It's more about the shared experiences, like family environment, and those unique experiences. It's almost like learning social aggression is more about picking up cues and behaviors from the people around you.
Wow. It's like different types of aggression have different roots.
In a way, yeah.
And what about siblings? Everyone knows that can be intense. Does that relate to bullying at preschool?
Absolutely. Research shows that those early sibling relationships, even as young as 3 or 4, if they're rocky, that can predict antisocial behavior later on. Aggression between siblings tends to go together. If one's aggressive, the other often is too. And it's probably not surprising that kids who are aggressive toward their siblings are more likely to have problems with peers outside the family. They might get rejected more often.
Sounds like the social skills, or lack of them, are transferring from home to preschool.
Exactly. And those bully victims, those kids who are both bullying and getting bullied, they're often involved in bullying at home too and tend to have higher levels of emotional problems. There's even a theory that siblings can be like a training ground for antisocial behavior.
Training ground, that's a powerful image.
It is. So understanding what's going on with siblings is really important when we're trying to figure out bullying in preschool.
And then we have gender, of course. Are there typical differences in how boys and girls bully at the preschool level?
Yeah, the research backs up the idea that girls tend to go for relational aggression more, while boys are more physical. But verbal aggression, like insults and name-calling, seems pretty equal between boys and girls.
Okay.
And these patterns can show up early, sometimes as young as 3. So those old ideas about girls not being as physically aggressive until they're teenagers, that's not really holding up.
So the stereotypes about girls being less physically aggressive, that might be true overall, but they're definitely not passive in their social interactions.
No, not at all. It just plays out in different ways. It's a reminder to pay attention to girls' social behavior from a young age, because that relational aggression can have a big impact.
Definitely. Okay, so we've talked about what bullying is, how researchers try to understand it, some of the things that contribute, and those typical ways it happens, like physical versus relational. Now let's dive into the roles kids take in bullying situations. We know about bullies and victims, but it sounds like there's more to it than that.
You're right. The main roles are bully, victim, and bully victim. And the interesting thing is, preschoolers in those roles are pretty similar to school-age kids, which kind of tells us intervening early is super important.
So let's break it down. What do we see in preschool bullies?
Well, they often see aggression as a good thing, like it's a way to solve problems or get what they want. They tend to show what's called proactive aggression. That's bullying with a goal in mind. They're going for intimidation, wanting to dominate. And a lot of people think they're always physically stronger, but that's not always true. They might not show as much warmth or empathy, and they really need to be in control. They can be impulsive, aggressive in general, and they report feeling unhappy or angry more often. Some research suggests they might not be as good at understanding social and emotional cues, and they judge aggressive actions more positively than other kids.
Sounds like it's a mix of things. Social, emotional, maybe even how they think. What about their social life? They're usually isolated.
This is the surprising part. Unlike that image of the lonely bully, preschool bullies are often pretty well liked. They tend to have more friends and hang out with other bullies. But there's a difference with boys and girls. Female preschool bullies are more isolated than boys. It's like their bullying isn't as accepted by other girls.
That's fascinating. So for boys, could bullying even be a way to get higher social status?
Yeah, in some groups, it can be tied to power and dominance for boys. Whereas with girls, it seems more about who's in and who's out, but their own social standing might suffer more.
Really interesting. Okay, now let's talk about the victims. What do we see in them?
They're often smaller, look younger than their age, and maybe they're not as mature socially. They might have physical features that make them stand out, and they often say they have fewer friends, less confidence and self-esteem.
Okay.
Those kids who get victimized without provoking it, they're often anxious, cautious, sensitive. They might have low self-esteem and even blame themselves for being picked on. And not having good friends, that can make them even more vulnerable.
Like a vicious cycle.
Exactly. And sadly, being the victim can also mean losing friends they do have. Other kids might avoid them because they're afraid of becoming targets themselves, or they just see victims as having lower social status. And when it's a whole group bullying one kid, that victim can feel totally disliked and like it's all their fault.
That's really sad.
It is.
Now, what about the bully victims, the kids who are both bullying and getting bullied? What's going on with them?
They're a unique bunch. Unlike bullies, who often use aggression to get something, bully victims are more reactive. They often make other kids react negatively because they can be super anxious, physically reactive, easily irritated. Socially, they're actually more like victims than bullies. They get rejected a lot, they tend to be reactive, get frustrated easily, quick to anger, and they break social rules more often because they're impulsive. Sadly, they're at higher risk of continuing to be involved in bullying as they get older. And this is interesting. Being a bully victim is actually more common in kindergarten than in later elementary school.
So they're stuck in this loop of being targeted and then lashing out in response.
Exactly. And when you look at how stable these roles are over time in preschool, it's a mixed bag. Being the bully is more consistent, but being the victim is less stable in those early years.
Why is that?
Well, one idea is that when an aggressive kid enters a new group, at first they might pick on a lot of different kids. But then they learn who's less likely to fight back or get help from others, and they focus on those kids. That could be why fewer kids stay victims for a long time, even though lots of them might get picked on for a bit. Another idea is that young kids aren't as good at recognizing submissive behavior, so they might try out picking on more kids before settling on specific ones.
Like their social radar is still developing.
Exactly.
Now, beyond those main roles, bully victim, are there other ways kids are involved? We hear about bystanders and defenders with older kids.
Right. With older kids, we see roles like reinforcers, the ones cheering the bully on, assistants who help but don't start it, defenders who stick up for the victim, and outsiders who just stay out of it. But for preschoolers, we know way less. The research we do have suggests they might not be as aware of or involved in being reinforcers or assistants.
Maybe they just can't understand those more subtle ways of being part of it.
Could be. As for defenders, there's not much research in preschool. Some studies say kids who are socially aware have a good theory of mind, so they can understand what others are thinking and feeling, and they have good planning skills, self-control. Even some ability to be deceptive, they might be more likely to defend. And interestingly, girls are more likely to be defenders across different ages.
Fits with what we know about girls being more tuned into social stuff and more empathetic. What about those kids who just watch and do nothing, the outsiders?
Well, other kids are there for most bullying, but they rarely intervene. We don't have much data on how preschool outsiders react, but it's a really important area to study. Why don't they step in, and what could encourage them to?
It shows how much more we need to learn about those group dynamics. Now let's talk about the environment itself, their preschool or daycare. How does that play a role in bullying?
This is a big one. I mean, they spend so much time there. How the physical space is set up can really affect how they act and interact. For example, bullying on the playground happens more often and lasts longer than bullying inside.
Makes sense.
It's all about the types of activities. Are they cooperative or competitive? How many adults are watching? How actively are they watching? What are the rules of the playground?
Right. A game with limited resources where everyone's competing, that could definitely lead to conflict. What about specific unsafe spots? Are there areas that are more common for bullying?
Research suggests those unsafe places are often outdoors, away from classrooms. It could be areas for physical activity or secluded spots where adults can't see. Indoors, it might be bathrooms, corners without supervision, or even just the edges of the schoolyard.
So being able to see and actively supervising are key. What about inside the classroom? Are there certain areas or types of play that are linked to aggression?
Yeah. Studies have found that certain areas like tables, language areas, cubbies, sand and water tables, and block areas, those are linked to physical aggression.
Okay.
Relational aggression has been linked to areas like music, sand and water play, language, and even the cubby area.
Interesting. You wouldn't immediately think of music as connected to relational aggression.
It might be about the social stuff around sharing instruments or taking turns.
Oh, right. Those early social negotiations.
Exactly. And there's also a distinction between open and closed learning centers. Open centers like blocks or dramatic play, those encourage more creativity and self-expression, but that can also lead to more conflict.
Hmm.
Spaces that aren't clearly defined or don't have rules for how to behave, that can also increase aggression. Closed centers, like science or music, those tend to encourage quieter, more independent or small group play.
So how a classroom is set up, the types of materials, even just having enough space for different activities, that can all affect how well kids interact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And how close the teacher is matters too. Just being physically near the kids can remind them to behave. But remember, bullying often happens during those less structured times, like recess or transitions, even when adults are close by.
Yeah.
Those subtle or private incidents can get missed.
So creating a supportive environment, both physically and socially, that's a key strategy for preventing bullying.
Totally. And speaking of prevention, what do we know about programs that try to tackle bullying in preschool?
Well, anti-bullying programs in general, they do have a positive effect. Usually they lead to a 20–23% decrease in bullying and a 17–20% decrease in victimization. But they tend to work better for older kids. There is one program specifically designed for kindergarten, though, called BPROX, and it's been rigorously tested.
BPROX is really interesting because it focuses on helping teachers handle bully victim problems better. It does that through intensive supervision strategies, group discussions among teachers, and close cooperation between consultants, the teachers, and parents over 4 months.
So it's about empowering the adults in the preschool.
Exactly. The training has several parts. Raising teachers' awareness of bullying, setting clear limits and rules with the kids, making sure all teachers respond consistently, helping them understand the different roles bystanders can play, even talking about motor development and body awareness, and encouraging teachers to reflect on their own goals and strategies. When they first evaluated BPROX, it showed a small decrease in victimization, but the findings were very reliable. And considering how much more aware teachers became of bullying incidents, it's considered a promising approach.
Seems really practical and targeted. Are there other programs out there for these early years?
There are programs that aim to build kids' social-emotional skills more broadly, like The Incredible Years, that has resources for parents and teachers, Roots of Empathy, and its version for preschoolers called Seeds of Empathy, which focuses on perspective taking. These programs have been good at reducing aggression in general, but we need more research to know for sure if they reduce peer victimization in preschool.
It seems like the key to making interventions work for this age is understanding their development, what motivates them, how they see social stuff, and making sure the programs fit those things.
Absolutely. And good interventions usually involve both parents and teachers. They're flexible enough to meet individual kids' needs, and they have strong support from school administrators and ongoing staff training.
Looking ahead, what are some of the big unanswered questions about bullying in preschool? What needs more research?
There are several. One is that we need better measurement tools. We don't have enough data on how reliable and valid our current methods are, like those peer nominations and teacher reports, when we're talking about preschoolers.
Okay.
There's also no real agreement on the best way to define the roles kids play in bullying.
So it's hard to compare different studies if everyone's measuring and defining things differently.
Right. And the methods we have now, they have limitations. Teacher ratings and peer nominations can be biased, memories can be fuzzy, gender stereotypes can come into play, and even direct observation, which is helpful, can be subjective, and having an observer there can change how kids act. So we need better, more reliable ways to assess bullying in preschool.
What about understanding the social dynamics more broadly?
That's another key area. We need to look at bullying as a social thing that happens in groups. We don't have enough data on those other roles in preschool, the assistants, reinforcers, and especially how bystanders react and what peer interventions might do.
Right.
And it's important to look closer at things inside the kids themselves, their empathy, their theory of mind, how they process social information, all in relation to bullying. And as we said before, the role of the physical and social environment, Whether it triggers and prevents bullying, we need to study that more too. Finally, it's crucial to make sure new anti-bullying programs are implemented well and evaluated properly. That way we know what works best and why.
So we've made progress, but there's still so much to learn about these early social interactions and how to support young kids.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue that can have a big impact on kids' social and emotional development in the long run.
So for you, the listener, who wants to learn quickly but thoroughly, we hope this deep dive into the world of early childhood social interactions, especially that bully-victim dynamic among preschoolers, has given you some valuable takeaways. We've explored how it's defined, the methods we use, the roles kids play, those family and environment influences, and even some promising approaches for prevention.
And a key thing to remember is that while bullying does happen in preschool, how it looks, how those little ones understand it, the roles they take, it's often different from what we see in older kids. This means we need to use age-appropriate approaches in research and when we design interventions.
So here's a final thought. Considering how early this all starts, what are the first chances we have within families and preschools to really foster those protective factors and promote good interactions, even before bullying has a chance to take root? Think about what this means for how we parent, how we design early childhood education programs, and even just how we understand social development in general. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.